There is a kind of tiredness that doesn't come from long days or short nights. Sleep doesn't fix it. Rest doesn't touch it. You can wake up after 8 hours and still feel like something inside you never powered down. This isn't the exhaustion of doing too much. It's the exhaustion of being, of having to wake up inside your own mind again, to inhabit a body, to think, feel, respond, and participate in another day of existence. What makes this tiredness so confusing is that it often exists without obvious suffering. Many people who feel it aren't in crisis. Their lives might look stable, even good. There may be no single problem to point to, no disaster to explain the weight they carry. And yet, underneath everything, there's a quiet resistance to continuing. Not because life is unbearable, but because it feels endlessly demanding in ways that are hard to explain. This kind of exhaustion doesn't announce itself loudly. It hums in the background. It shows up as a reluctance to start the day, a heaviness that appears the moment you become conscious. It's the feeling that every small task costs more than it should, that simply existing requires a level of effort you no longer have. And because there isn't a clear name for it in everyday language, people often turn it inward. They assume they're ungrateful, unmotivated, broken in some subtle way. They tell themselves they should be able to handle this. Everyone else seems to. But this isn't a personal failure. It's a psychological state that emerges when awareness, pressure, and persistence collide. And understanding that difference is the first step toward understanding why this tiredness feels so deep, so constant, and so difficult to escape. When existence becomes visible. For most people, life runs on autopilot. Days blur together, routines carry them forward, and the effort of existing stays mostly invisible. You wake up, move through familiar motions, and fall asleep without thinking too much about the machinery underneath it all. This invisibility is not ignorance. It's a psychological buffer. It allows life to feel lighter than it actually is. But for some people, that buffer weakens, and when it does, existence becomes visible. It often happens quietly. A small, ordinary moment suddenly feels strange. You're washing your hands or answering an email, and a thought cuts through, I've done this countless times. I'll do it countless times again. What once felt neutral now feels repetitive in a way that's impossible to ignore. The routine doesn't change, but your relationship to it does. Once you start seeing the mechanics of daily life, it's hard to stop. Every action reveals the effort behind it. Every choice feels deliberate rather than automatic. You become aware that being alive is not passive. It's constant maintenance. Decisions, reactions, responsibilities, expectations, one after another, without pause. This awareness can feel like clarity at first, even insight, but over time, it becomes heavy. The repetition starts to feel suffocating rather than stabilizing. Tasks lose their neutrality and take on emotional weight, not because they're difficult, but because they never end. And this is where the exhaustion deepens. You're no longer just living, you're watching yourself live, conscious of every step, every obligation, every tomorrow waiting to repeat today. When existence becomes visible like this, it stops feeling effortless. It starts feeling like something you have to consciously carry. Performing a life you don't feel inside. When existence starts to feel heavy, many people don't stop functioning. They adapt. From the outside, life continues as expected. They show up, they respond, they smile at the right moments, they meet obligations and play their role well enough that no one asks questions. But internally, something has gone quiet. This is where exhaustion takes on a different shape. It's no longer just about doing things. It's about performing them. Every interaction becomes a small act. Caring has to be simulated. Engagement has to be summoned. Even emotions feel rehearsed, like they're happening at a distance rather than being fully felt. There's often a growing sense of separation, as if life is being watched rather than lived. Conversations sound slightly muted. Time feels oddly flat. Moments that should register emotionally don't quite land. And the effort of trying to feel present, of trying to care the way you think you should, becomes draining in itself. What makes this state especially isolating is that it's invisible. Productivity continues. Responsibilities are met. From the outside, nothing looks wrong. But internally, maintaining this version of yourself requires constant effort. You're not just existing, you're maintaining the appearance of existence. And over time, that performance becomes exhausting. Not because life is falling apart, but because holding yourself together like this, without genuine connection or relief, quietly consumes whatever energy you have left. How people slowly learn to stop. Trying this kind of exhaustion rarely appears all at once. It builds, slowly, quietly, often over years. Not from one defining moment, but from many small ones that never quite resolve. Times you tried and nothing changed. Times you hoped and were disappointed. Times you invested effort only to watch the outcome slip beyond your control. Over time, the mind learns something important. Trying doesn't reliably lead to relief. When effort keeps failing to produce safety, meaning, or stability, the nervous system adapts. It pulls back, not out of weakness, but out of self-protection. This is how people slowly stop trying. Not dramatically, but internally. Instead of hope, there's caution. Instead of effort, there's endurance. You keep going, but without expectation. You stop reaching for improvement because reaching has hurt too many times before. And while this withdrawal can reduce disappointment, it creates a different cost: emotional flatness and deep fatigue. This isn't giving up on life in an obvious way. It's giving up on the idea that life will respond to your effort. You still show up, still do what's required, but something essential has shut down to conserve energy. And existing like this, without belief, without anticipation, without a sense that anything you do really matters, requires a constant, grinding form of endurance, one that doesn't look dramatic from the outside, but slowly drains everything on the inside. Why? This feeling is so hard to talk about. One of the heaviest parts of this exhaustion is how difficult it is to name out loud. The moment someone says, "I'm tired of existing," the meaning is often misunderstood. People hear danger. They hear crisis. They hear something that needs to be fixed immediately. And because of that, honesty starts to feel unsafe. So most people don't say it. They soften it. They hide it behind humor, silence, or vague phrases like, "I'm just tired," or "I'm burned out," even when those words don't fully fit. It's easier to be misunderstood quietly than to be misunderstood loudly. There's also a lack of language for wanting rest without wanting escape. This state isn't always about wanting life to end. It's about wanting the effort of being alive to pause. But society doesn't leave much room for that distinction. You're either coping or you're not, okay or not okay. And existing in the space between feels socially unacceptable. As a result, people learn to carry this exhaustion alone. They keep functioning because stopping would raise questions they don't know how to answer. They become skilled at appearing fine while feeling increasingly detached inside. And that silence adds weight. Because when an experience can't be spoken, it starts to feel unreal, isolating, like something you're supposed to endure quietly, even as it slowly consumes what little energy you have left. What actually helps? When life feels too heavy, when someone is tired of existing, what helps is rarely motivation or advice. Pushing harder usually makes the exhaustion worse. What helps first is permission. Permission to not be okay. Permission to exist at a lower capacity without treating that as failure. Permission to stop performing strength when there is none left. This kind of exhaustion doesn't lift through force. It eases through gentleness, through reducing pressure rather than adding purpose, through moments that ask very little, rest that doesn't need to be earned, presence without expectations, connection that doesn't demand explanation, not solutions, just relief. Support matters, especially from people who can sit with discomfort without rushing to fix it. Being seen accurately can be restorative in itself. Professional help can also play a role, not as a way to erase the feeling, but as a way to understand it and make space for it without judgment. What often helps most are small, grounding moments. Warmth, quiet, familiar sounds, simple routines that don't pretend to be meaningful but make the present moment slightly less heavy. These things don't cure exhaustion, but they can make it more bearable. And that matters, because sometimes survival doesn't look like progress. Sometimes it looks like resting long enough for the weight to lighten just a little, enough to breathe, enough to stay, enough to continue, not because you have to, but because for now, existing at the minimum is still enough.